What is up, guys? This is QRim from the Trinity of Lift, and today I'm bringing all of you guys my brilliant Madolche deck profile for this July 2015 format. So, if you were keeping up with any of the Madolche trends over the past couple of weeks, you might have noticed that this variant of Madolche has been popping up quite a bit around the internets. Basically, when I saw this for the first time, I was like, what is this thing? And I'm like, Gem Knights and Madolche? I never thought I would hear that in one single deck. But after testing it out a little bit and just trying it out for myself, I actually did find that it was quite effective at what it basically is geared to do, which is OTK your opponent by turn 2 or turn 1 even if you can. So that's pretty cool, and this Madolche variant is freaking I will say it's just freaking aggressive. Like, this build is probably the most aggressive build of Madolche that I've ever played, and it's just hella fun. So today I'm of course going to try and give you guys my deck profile of it, and of course we're going to start off with the main deck as usual. Now then, we're going to start off with the Madolches, of course. Now we go with the 3 copies of Madolche because she's your +1, you need 3 of her basically. We have 3 copies of Angeli because she's your +2, so we also need 3 of her. Then we have the 3 copies of Hoot Cakes so that we can have our 1-to-1 ratio of Hoot Cakes to Angeli to ensure that our Angelis are never dead. Then we have the 2 copies of Messenger Out for our spell and trap searching. Then we have the 2 copies of Mufuli because Mufuli is the one that can help us combo off with our Angeli and just do the generic Madolche play into our Queen Tiara Misu. And then finally, I have the last Madolche, which is something that you don't see that often, which is the 1 copy of Pudding Cess. Now, we have the copy of Pudding Cess in here because of the fact that this card right here is a level 5. And because of that, we can use the actual real Pudding Cess to make some cool rank 5 plays, as well as that we can also make the Chocolate Pudding Cess and have her full effect, which is pretty darn cool. So we also do have the Pudding Cess in this version of Madolche. So that will be the almost standard Madolche lineup for this deck. Moving on to the other supporting cards, because this is the brilliant Madolche version, we are running a couple of Gem Knights. So we are running the 1 Garnet and the 1 Lazuli, just because they're probably the best Gem Knights, really. Garnet being a 1900 body, and Lazuli helping us get back our Garnet for rank 4 plays. So we just have these two just because we don't want more, in my opinion. People who run the ratio of 3 Gem Knights to 3 Brilliant Fusion are really just missing out on the potential of this deck and the consistency, because of the fact that unlike things like Psychic Madolche, where you'd have to run the 3 E-Tele plus the 3 Psychic monsters, in this deck you only need to run the 3 Brilliant Fusion plus maybe 2 Gem Knights at most. So because of that, you theoretically are more consistent because you're not running as much bad cards. So we only are running these 2, of course, just to have our Brilliant Fusions to be live. Moving on, we have a small performance engine in this deck in the 2 copies of Trick Clown, the 1 copy of Damage Juggler, and then the 1 Hat Tricker. We need the Trick Clowns basically to get us into our Seraphonite play with our Brilliant Fusions. So of course we have to have 2 of that because, again, it is a free level 4 monster that we can summon back as soon as we Brilliant Fusion. So that's pretty cool. And then of course we also have the Damage Juggler to help us block OTKs and to also help us search out our Hat Tricker, which again is just basically a free level 4 that we can use to make any of our rank 4 Xyz plays. So that is it for the little performance engine we are running. And then finally, we have 2 copies of Maxi to round off the monster lineup because Nodin is in format, and this card is really good against Nodin, so basically we have to main the Maxis now instead of side them. So yes, we have the 2 Maxis in the main deck to round off the monsters. Moving on to the spells, we have the 1 copy of Chateau and the 1 ticket. I will always continue to preach that this is probably the best ratio around, just because of the fact that these cards don't actually help you with your combo plays, and because of that, I felt that multiples were not necessary, as they both are also searchable off of Mess and Gelato. So again, I will be very much standing by this 1-in-1 ratio. Moving on, we of course have the MVP basically of the spells. We have the 3 copies of Brilliant Fusion because it helps us get into our Gem Knight Seraphonite, and of course this card by itself, because we will usually be sending either the Garnet or the Lazuli plus the Trick Clown, we usually will be getting a +2 off of this 1 spell card, which is really good. And it kind of draws parallels to Madolche Angeli, because very much like Angeli, this card is another 1 card +2, which is really, really good. Now, this also does function essentially as 3 copies of Double Summon, which also provides bodies on board, which is really cool because this card just opens up so many OTKs for this deck. It's not even funny. Usually whenever you do open a Brilliant Fusion and usually any Madolche, preferably Magellan actually, you can just have this ridiculous OTK board or this really really big board that you can make with just this card and another one of your good Madolches. So that is why I decided to play this deck, and of course we have to run 3 because again it's just so good. Moving on, we have the 2 copies of Instant Fusion because Nodin is, again, like I said with Maxi, he is in format, so even though we want to try and also stop our opponent's Nordins, we do want to have Nordins of our own to get free Xyz monsters on board, or just have just free pluses, actually. So we do have the 2 Instant Fusion. Then we have the 2 copies of Forbidden Lance in this deck because this deck can be stopped like in its tracks by Fiendish Chain and Breakthrough Skill. So we do have the Forbidden Lances in here to help us protect against those things. Moving on, we have 2 one-ofs in the form of 1 Raigeki and then the 1 Book of Moon. Raigeki is here, of course, because this is an OTK-based deck. We do want to clear our opponent's board as much as we can whenever we do want to push for that damage, so that, again, we can push through it with as much damage as we can. And then, of course, Book of Moon is in here because it helps us dodge things like Effect Veiler, as well as it also can help us abuse our Magellines a little bit more, too, which is really cool. So we do have the Book of Moon in here. And then finally, we have a couple more spells, which is just 3 copies of Upstart Goblin, because we do want to have that 37 card consistency in this deck. Because, again, we want to see our combos as soon as we can. So that will be it for the spell lineup. Moving on to the traps, it's not too many traps, it's just pretty good traps that I wanted to include. We'll start off with the 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill because we do not want to deal with Necros of Unicorn. Unicorn can just really stop this deck like a lot. So we do want to have the Breakthrough Skill to help us with just general effect negation, as well as to also stop things like the Necros of Unicorn, as well as stop things like the Infernoid monsters, as the Infernoids actually do have quite a good matchup against this deck because it can stop Madolche Hoot Cakes, which is really, really important for majority of our combos. So we do also have this card for Necros of Unicorn, as well as all of them Infernoids, which are pretty bad. So we do have the 2 Breakthrough. Then I'm also maining 1 copy of Debunk because of the fact that Maxi is running everywhere. It's running like in almost every single main deck pretty much. So because of that, I didn't want to get stopped underneath Maxi because, again, Madolches are pretty infamous for taking the Maxi challenge and then usually losing it, actually. So because of that, I did want to have the 1 copy of Debunk in here to help me stop all those Maxis and just in general stop all those hand traps, as well as also I guess you could say kind of stop those things in the graveyard, like all those Graf Seer, Skarms, or Shadol cards. So that's also why I do run the Debunk. And then I also do run the 1 copy of Karma Cut because we are running quite a few weird cards in this deck, like the Damage Juggler and the Pudding Cess and those weird cards. And we also will occasionally draw Brilliant Fusion dead if we have used it already in the more grindy games. So because of that, I did decide to put in the Karma Cut as a discard trap in this deck because sometimes you really cannot get any kind of use out of those dead cards in hand. So at least with Karma Cut, you can use this card to get that card out of your hand and then also have some cool banishing removal on your opponent's side of the field. So that is why I do have the 1 Karma Cut in here to round off the 40 card main deck. Moving on to the extra deck, of course we start off with our 2 copies of Gem Knight Seraphinite because, again, like I said with Brilliant Fusion, this card is a walking double summon, so that's pretty darn cool. It really just does open up a ton of OTKs in this deck, so of course that is why we do have the 2 Seraphinites to help us support that Brilliant Fusions. Then, of course, we have the 2 copies of Elder Entity Norden because we do have instant fusions in this deck. So we have to have the Norden to accompany the instant fusion so that, again, we can get those big plays off. Okay, so that is it going to be for the fusion monsters. Moving on to the XZs, we, of course, have to have the 2 copies of Madolche Queen Tiara Misu because she's just so good. I'm serious. If you haven't read her yet, like, for whatever reason, read her. She's really good. So, of course, we have 2 of her. Then we also have the 1 copy of Pudding Sis Chocolat a la mode because, like I said with the actual Pudding Sis from the main deck, we can make her with her full effect this time around because we are running the real Pudding Sis. So that's really cool because she can end up becoming just free pluses for you every single turn. I should also mention again that underneath Chateau, she can punch over every single Clayfort monster that is tribute summoned, bar Apocryphort Towers. So that in and of itself is really good too. So we do have the Pudding Sis in here. Then, moving on to the combo-based rank 3s. We have 1 copy of Levier and the 1 copy of Invoker. Now, we have Invoker, of course, because basically every Madolche deck has to have 1 Invoker at least, for whenever you cannot use the Levier. But I only have one Levier in this version of the deck because of the fact that we won't usually be going into the generic Madolche combo too often. It will come up every so often, so that is why we do still run the Levier. But it isn't as much of a game winner for us as it is just to try and do an OTK combo, which actually doesn't use Levier usually. So I have cut one copy of Levier just to include some other good rank 4 XZs. So yeah, that will be it for the combo-based rank 3s. Then moving on to the more generic stuff, we have the one copy of Performage Trapeze Magician because this is the card that helps us OTK. So of course we have to have that card in here. Then we have the one copy of Dark Rebellion because I wanted to actually just have a really big body that I could summon off of one instant fusion. And so I did decide to put the Dark Rebellion in here. Now, I have chosen to put this in over Excalibur for the fact that this is generic and I can make this off of instant fusion, while Excalibur cannot be made because sadly Nodin is indeed a fairy. So I have chosen for Dark Rebellion to be the big beater in this extra deck. Moving on, we have the one copy of Dweller because we hate Shadows and Burning Abyss, excuse me, and so of course we have to have this card just to help us in those matchups. Then we also have the one copy of Castel because we are running quite a few non-Madolche level 4s, so having the Castel actually will come up quite a bit, so having just of course the good spot removal, it never hurts. Then for the generic rank 3, we have one copy of Engineer because it helps us play around Valkyris, which is again very important in this deck because again we are trying to OTK our opponent as fast as we can. So we have the Engineer in here because it can help us play around that Valkyris. And then, following that note, we also do have one other rank 5 in the form of Artifact Durandal, because this also does kind of help us get us to play around Valkyris, as whenever we can use its effect, we can just shuffle our opponent's hand, and hoping that they do not draw another Valkyris, we can just, again, poke for free. So again, we have the Durandal, again, to help us around that Valkyris, and to be just another good rank 5 that we can run in this deck. And then, of course, the Yusei token, because I love this Yusei token. So alright guys, that will be it for my brilliant Madolche deck profile. I hope you all did very much enjoy this deck, and as always, if you guys have any sorts of comments, questions, and or concerns, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, as I do check all of my comments, and I usually will very much try to also respond to them. So again, hope you all do enjoy, and as always, this is QRim from the Trinity of Lift, and I'll see all of you guys later. Peace out.